Futures in Fundraising is presented by Alexander Haas. Alexander Haas, transforming institutions that transform lives.
Hi, and welcome back to Futures in Fundraising. I'm your host, David King, president of Alexander Haas. Today, our guest is Eddie Stuart, Vice Chancellor for Advancement at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Eddie, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me today. Looking forward to it.
Eddie, I'm wondering if you could give us a little overview of UNCW, profile of the institution. Obviously, it's located in Wilmington, North Carolina, not Delaware. So that everybody in the audience has a sense of what UNCW is about.
Sure. We are I would characterize UNCW as an emerging campus in the University of North Carolina system. We are, I would categorize us as a medium-sized, comprehensive university. Okay. We have an enrollment of about 17,000 students. About 10% of the student body is graduate. And we are on the coast of North Carolina, so we like to fancy ourselves as the coastal university. It's been a pleasure to be here. I've been at UNCW for about 18 years in a variety of positions before landing in the Vice Chancellor role about 5 years ago. And it's been a real treat to see the institution prosper. Over the last decade, we've been the fastest growing school in the UNC system from a percentage standpoint, and we've increased our quality as well, which is a little hard to do. Growing's easy, growing with quality is a little bit more of a challenge. But
Tell me about it.
It's a fabulous place to be, wonderful culture. I think, I like to tease and say that our football team is still undefeated because we don't have a football team. But we are competitive in basketball. We've been to the NCAA tournament several times in the last 12, 15 years. And so that's kind of what we do in the winter around here when we're not out on the beach, or at least wishing we were on the beach.
17,000 students, that's a pretty big enrollment. I mean, that would put you just about on par with UNC Chapel Hill, wouldn't it, in terms of number of students?
It's not bad. Chapel Hill's, and I think they're in the 27,000 neighborhood, and we have certainly grown a lot. When I started 18 years ago at UNCW, we had an enrollment of about 9,500. And I remember then there being a lot of sentiment that the sky's falling, we're growing too fast, we can't hold on. And here we are at 17,000. I would argue that we've been able to maintain a culture on our campus that's very student-focused. We place a lot of emphasis on the student experience. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, we've had a lot of success with our donor base. Predominantly, we receive more donor support each year from non-alumni as we do alumni. So having a relatively young alumni base, right. UNCW was established in 1947. So you can imagine the profile of our alumni base. Well over half of them are less than 40 years old. Yeah. But as our alumni giving is certainly growing, we're also seeing a lot of support from what we call the Cape Fear region in this neck of the woods.
So one of the challenges we see with institutions like yours that have grown so much over the last, let's say, decade or so, mm-hmm. is a challenge with the alumni participation measure, because you're graduating so many more younger alums now than you graduated older alums who were in their giving years. And as we all know, those younger alums, it takes them a few years to get their philanthropic legs under them. So right. The numerator is growing faster than the denominator, or maybe it's the other way around, and it's just hard to make the percentage of alumni giving keep up.
It is, and thank you for the reminder. It's something that kind of haunts me every day. Interestingly, we were talking earlier today in one of our team meetings that for the last 5 years, we've seen a 5-6% increase on average in our number of alumni donors, but our alumni participation rate is holding steady. So I think that's pretty indicative to what's happening nationally.
Absolutely. It's a game that's hard to keep up with when you grow like that, because those young alums just they're not ready to give right out of school, but you're graduating them in numbers that exceed, you might graduate so many kids in one year that it covers up 2 or 3, 4 graduating classes from back in the 50s.
It can, and it's interesting too, because to add insult to injury, if you take an institution like UNCW, we really only woke up about a decade ago, 10 to 15 years ago, and got serious about alumni engagement and developing our annual giving program and all that, everything that comes with that. And the challenge has been nurturing into the fold, so to speak, a group of people that institutionally we've lost for all practical purposes. So we have to work, I think, extra hard to overcome some of those obstacles, but it's certainly worth it. We're fortunate in that well over 90% of our graduates indicate, we do all kinds of surveys and try to gather data. Overwhelmingly, they would say, I would absolutely attend UNCW again if given the opportunity. So although we've got deep pride among our alumni, that we haven't been able to parlay that into giving to the extent we feel like our university deserves.
So one of the things we've encouraged some of our clients to begin doing is thinking about alumni participation in terms of number of gifts, number of giving units, and then growth over the prior year, and not trying to chase that percentage of alumni who give, because you just can't catch up with it. There's nothing you can, you're just not going to be able to grow giving fast enough when you're graduating. In your case, you're graduating 4,000 kids a year, maybe 3,500 kids a year. You just can't, you're not ever going to catch up until those smaller classes from the 50s and 60s age out and these larger classes grow up.
Yeah, that's very true. And honestly, I'm a big believer, and I think every day my belief grows more and more that student philanthropy is really the only thing that will turn that ship for us. We know that as soon as freshman year, you're talking about the power of philanthropy and the impact it has on a student's education. I think just pointing out the types of opportunities philanthropy facilitates for our students. You've got 4 years or less, some cases more, to capture a student's interest and getting them to think about it. So we actually launched a campaign a few years ago, or I would call it an initiative, not really a campaign, called Get to Know Phil. And Phil is the stick figure that we kind of have throughout the year, talking about the value of philanthropy. Of course, Phil is short for philanthropy. Sure. And the idea is to pique our students' interest in this. What are they talking about? And so we, we'll have in the spring and the fall a week-long push to get students to write thank you notes to donors and to help them understand the things that are provided by complete strangers via their philanthropic giving. And it's been a lot of fun, because even if those students, aren't active donors, at least they know that donors are active in their space. And when the time comes, they'll understand that they're participating in something worthwhile. So it's we've placed a lot of emphasis on trying to pattern our students, developing good habits of giving in our students, in hopes that will carry on when they graduate.
And I think, for years there was the push on the senior class to try to get the soon-to-be graduates to give. But I think that's waiting too long. I think you've really got to start when they get on campus for the first year.
I agree. And the other thing is, one thing that I see, we even still are guilty of doing it, and we're trying to wean ourselves, is that there's usually a gimmick associated with the senior class gift.
Yep.
Make a gift of $20.18 and you'll get a special VIP parking pass for commencement. Well, that's great, but next year, where's my parking pass?
What am I giving them next year? Yeah.
It
becomes transactional. It's like, like giving to the telethon or at PBS and you get a CD or something.
Exactly. And so I think the idea is to sell the power of philanthropy and then let the chips fall where they may as it relates to participation. I'd rather have fewer participants and the idea that I might retain them in years to come than I would, just getting that one gift up front. So it's all a balancing act, I think.
Let me ask you one more question about the growth issue, and then we can move on to something else. But tell me about how that rapid growth over this last decade has put pressure on the institution in terms of of facilities and resources. I would imagine it's hard to go from 9,500 to 17,000 without more classrooms, more beds, more parking, more everything.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it, and it is on the upside of that. The North Carolina system does fund according to enrollment growth. So there is a little bit of funding that comes with that, although that really only covers the academic side.
Right.
But when you look at student housing, when you look at utilities, auxiliaries, parking, campus police, the library, you find yourself in a position where you're a little bit compromised, and you think, we've been climbing out of a hole, I think, for a long, long time. And somehow we have been able to efficiently address that. One of the things that, on the one hand, I'm very proud of, on the other hand, is scary, is that we have the highest degree efficiency in the North Carolina system.
Wow.
So when you look at the cost per degree attainment, it's very low. The argument could be, well, that's not something to brag about, because that basically means you're doing great work and you're not really getting the funding that should come with it. But it certainly is a challenge. About, I'd say 15 years ago, we made a strategic decision to try to be more of a residential campus. The idea being most of our alumni had an affinity to the Wilmington area and not necessarily to the UNCW campus. So we made a strategic decision to create more student housing and really try to build that environment that students would walk out of here thinking, gosh, that campus really nurtured me into what I've become. And I have an affinity for everything from the student rec center to the library to the student union. So fortunately, our state appropriations, our giving, our tuition fees, all that has kept pace, but it certainly has been a pressure-laden situation. I always tell folks that we've gotten pretty good at figuring out how to pour 7 gallons into a 5-gallon bucket. I mean, it's very, very hard to do.
Or 700 cars into a 500 space parking lot's probably the biggest challenge.
You got it without making anybody mad. Yeah.
Good luck with that. All right, we're going to take a very short break, and then we'll be back with more with Eddie Stuart from UNC Wilmington.
Perhaps the most challenging part about being a consultant is sharing with a client bad news. You always want to go in and recognize the great work that they do, the successes that they have achieved, but you can't help but realize there's some things that they're not doing correctly, in some cases possibly not in accordance with state law, federal law. And so sharing with them what those deficiencies are sometimes very difficult. You have to find the right words and the right time and the right way of conveying where they need to make some changes. And if you do it correctly, then everybody is happy in the end.
Welcome back. Today we are talking with Eddie Stuart, Vice Chancellor for Advancement at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Eddie, we've been talking about the growth of the enrollment and the student body and the facilities, but I would imagine along with that had to be a lot of growth in the resources put forward for philanthropy and development work. I know that you have development officers working within the different colleges and units at the campus. One of the challenges that people often face with that, and that we face sometimes with our clients, is no matter how much you're raising, everybody always wants more. And you can never fit everybody's priorities into the realistic fundraising capacity. So how do you manage in an institution that's growing the way that you're growing to avoid sort of jealousy or turf wars or conflicts with everybody in the different units wanting, needing really, not just wanting, needing more than they have?
That's a tough balancing act. And interestingly, we have, in my time at UNCW, fiddled with several different models. I actually was hired into almost a completely decentralized model where I was hired as the director of development for the College of Arts and Sciences. And although we reported up through central advancement, we pretty much worked for our deans. And that changed dramatically as we were approaching launching our last campaign, Soaring to Greatness. And interestingly, we re-centralized, demonstrated to deans and others that we were actually in a better position to raise money more effectively because we were a little bit more focused on major gifts work and less on departmental newsletters and event planning and all the things that come with.
I was going to say receptions and all the stuff that goes along with working for the dean.
Sure. So I think we've tried to build a culture at UNCW. There are two sets of silos that I worry about. One is within our division for university advancement, which has about 44 employees in the areas of annual giving, alumni relations, leadership annual gifts, advancement services. It's real easy to get in our little areas. And when I came in as vice chancellor, we were very happy about sharing what we were doing with others, but that isn't quite good enough. So we moved to, okay, let's share in advance what we're planning to do and how it might impact each other. And we finally gotten to a place where we're actually talking before we plan and taking the context of what the different units want to accomplish and how it influences the plans for particular areas. Second set of silos is, of course, a little bit harder to manage because you have no authority. You only have charm and influence. And that's mostly with deans and athletics, the athletics director, university librarian, you name it. And really what we've done is we've admitted that we give up. We cannot do everything for everybody on our campus. However, for those that are interested in participating in this advancement enterprise, we want to equip you to do that. So in other words, we invest in developing expertise, infrastructure, bringing best practices back to our campus so that for those that want to engage with us, they've got a clear path for that. We're starting to see some positive impact of that. Secondly, I think having a solid relationship with deans helps. I'm not sure what it is about UNCW because I know it's not true on other campuses, but we have had 5 deans over a period of, the last 15, 17 years, and they have all turned over once or twice. But the culture among that group is very collaborative. And, there are all kinds of wrestling matches for resources and facilities and all that other kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they all are deeply invested in this idea of UNCW and the kind of experience we're trying to provide and the role that each of the colleges and schools play in that overall. So we've benefited from that, I think, in our development operation. And one of the things that strategically we did was we implemented what we call a 70-30 rule, which every development director who's aligned with a college or a school, 70% of their portfolio roughly is going to be connected to that college or school, but they've got 30% wiggle room. Mm-hmm. And I wanted the ability, back when I was assistant vice chancellor, I wanted the ability to be able to assign donors to the right person on our team, not necessarily the person that we think lines up most with what we're assuming a donor's interest to be. And that's been fun for 2 reasons. First of all, it allows our development directors to step out of their role that's aligned to a very specific area. It also gives our deans opportunities to work with a broad variety of advancement professionals, not just their development director. And so that's been fun to watch, hard to manage, but at the end of the day, I think worth it. So those are some things that we've tried to do
I would imagine that also, I'm going to say forces, but I don't really mean forces, but necessitates, better word, all the development officers to not get their head buried so deep in their own unit that they don't know what's going on with the rest of the university. You have to know what's going on university-wide if you're going to carry a portfolio that includes prospects that aren't just interested in business or nursing or whatever your assigned role is.
Sure. And I think it does place an emphasis on, a development director knowing not just the products in their department, but the products throughout the store. So
Right.
I think if you're going to be of good service to those that want to invest in us philanthropically, I think it positions them well to be able to speak, maybe not eloquently, but dangerously at least, about different areas of the university. And that puts some pressure on our senior leadership team to make sure that everybody's well informed and well equipped. And, if a development director finds something that she feels like everybody should know, we have vehicles to bring that to the table. So I think it is, again, and I think partly due to our size, we're able to manage that. If we were 3 times our size, we might have to have more formal mechanisms in place to facilitate that. But you're right. It does encourage development directors to step out of their zone, so to speak.
One of the things we found in working with deans, if you don't have a group that is as collegial as yours seems to be, is that they will always be competitive.
Sure.
So if we can find one in there who's willing to devote some energy to fundraising and make them successful, the rest of them will look around and go, wait, how did he get all that new stuff? How do I get that? Go talk to some donors.
It's
we can
not
help
utopia here. That does happen. I'm a big Tar Heels fan, and there's debate on whether or not Dean Smith was the first to implement this, but I love, the culture among their basketball teams over the years is to always point to the guy that passed you the ball before you made the shot. And so we really emphasize pointing to the assist, especially among our deans and especially in front of the provost and the chancellor. So if the provost and the chancellor are aware that the business school dean was instrumental in facilitating a gift that came into the psychology department in the College of Arts and Sciences, everybody sort of wins in that. But I'd be lying if I told you there wasn't a competitive spirit among that group. But we try to channel it. We don't fight it, we channel it.
Turn that into positive.
Try to.
Let me ask you another question about this. So when you've got staff and they're managing portfolios and they are to some degree accountable to the dean and then to some degree accountable to you, what kind of metrics do you use and what do you measure and look at and consider important when you're measuring those development officers' productivity?
Interestingly, years ago, we adopted it, and it was just because we thought this is what we were supposed to do. We emphasized heavily activity. We counted contacts.
The old moves management model, right? Did you send them a birthday card and that kind of stuff?
That's right. And so we noticed that there was great activity occurring with very little purpose behind it. And as our program matured, we moved to what I would call from an activity model to a productivity model where we emphasize active proposals. So we look at the number of active proposals our fundraising staff is advancing in any given time. We also look at days and status. So if you're on day 347 on cultivating a relationship for an active proposal, I would argue maybe they're really not in cultivation. Maybe they're in some sort of purgatory of sorts. And so we really try to emphasize those things that imply forward movement. We also emphasize discovery. We also don't like to have portfolios that are so big they seem a little bit insurmountable. So we've reduced the size of our portfolios and made sure that every person who occupies a space in that portfolio is actually worth pursuit. And so the way I describe it to our development team is, pretend you have a pool of about 80 to 100 prospects that are reserved for you, but your portfolio might be 25 to 30 that you're actually cooking something up with. And as those people make commitments, you go to your pool and
pull some more in,
pull out. And I think that's enabled us to emphasize good work on those who are ready while we're thinking about those that need to become ready. And it's usually what we do that prepares them and makes them ready as opposed to them just miraculously doing that on their own.
So I just wrote an article recently that is roughly titled that the pursuit of perfection is killing your productivity or killing your development program. Yeah. And around the premise of I've known development officers who they never had everything they needed to actually make an ask. So, they were waiting for the perfect time and the perfect ask and the perfect situation, which never comes. So you've got this perpetual cycle of getting ready, but never pulling the trigger on an ask.
It's kind of like waiting until you're financially prepared to have children. That day is just not going to come. And so I think at some point it's kind of the argument that don't let perfect get in the way of good.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm even guilty of it. I sometimes have to jerk myself out of this. Maybe just putting something out there will start a conversation instead of waiting for the planets to align.
Yeah, one of the conclusions in this article is, sometimes good enough is good enough. You can go ahead and move forward and work on it from that perspective. So you're really looking at asks, and you're looking at activity. You are looking to some degree at activities, but they're activities that are focused on getting to an ask.
And we focus on thoughtful strategy. We're in the process right now of developing what we're calling proposal briefs for each active proposal that essentially says, what makes us think we know what we're talking about when we say we think this person would be receptive to an ask of this amount to support this thing for this reason. And it's 4 or 5 sentences that anybody could read in our system and kind of hear where we're going with that person. And then we work with our team to help bounce ideas, strategies, opportunities to engage. And I think it's a quality over quantity emphasis that we're going to. And to me, I think that's the natural progression of the maturity of a solid major gifts enterprise.
Yeah, and it requires more effort to manage that way and to measure that way than it does just to look at numbers. You've got to be able to look at the detail behind the numbers, and somebody may look like they're underperforming based on some metric that you've developed, but if you get in there and have a conversation with them, you may find that they're performing fine. But the fact of the matter is, we all live on the donor time frame. We can.
Sure.
The more you try to push a donor to do something that they're not interested or ready to do, the less likely it is they're going to do anything.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. A story I like to tell, years ago, probably 12 years ago at UNCW, I was in the position to hire 2 development directors, one for our College of Arts and Sciences and one for all 3 of our professional schools, which back then were nursing, business, and education. And the Arts and Sciences development professional was occupying the space that I had just vacated.
Right.
I took the cream of the crop with me.
Oh, that was nice of you.
Portfolio. Yeah, I didn't even know I was doing it. And what I left her with was a portfolio of strangers. Great discovery opportunity, but albeit a portfolio of strangers. The one that was working in business, nursing, and education got the best prospects of those 3 areas and had a nicely cultivated pool of prospects that she had inherited from 2 other development directors. And I found myself very quickly having to convince our Arts and Sciences development director that you are doing what UNCW needs you to do.
Yeah.
And I think over 4 years, she had brought in and either threw back in the pool or retained over 360 major guest prospects. And, 4 or 5 years later, started to see considerable fruits from her labor. And I think the message is there, do what's right for the institution and the portfolio, not necessarily some magic metric that's out there. Right. So every year we kind of talk about how those 2 things intersect. And again, I think our size facilitates that.
And I think that's an important point to make when we're as a profession, and especially in higher education, I think we're just we're going a little bit metrics crazy in some ways, and and trying to do everything by numbers and trying to manage it, like it's a sales organization, and it's not a sales organization. It's a relationship building organization, and that's a completely different process.
It is, but you have to do both. I think the balance of art and science is something that I've always really thought a lot about, and I think that picking the right metrics and looking at the metrics that that give you an indication that you're going in the right direction. And I would also say metrics that your team buys into.
Right.
If they want to be productive instead of just being active, they're a lot more enthusiastic about it.
Well, and I think if they know too that you're willing to look behind the numbers,
Sure.
as like the case you described with the arts and sciences person, that you're not just looking at a dashboard every morning and making decisions about people based purely on numbers, that you're willing
Sure.
to take a deeper dive. That helps
Right.
with buy-in too, because I think, when you start to put metrics in place, it can scare people.
It can, especially if you pick the wrong ones and don't have the right quantity associated with those.
Or they're unrealistic. Yeah, we see
Right.
that a lot. How many how many prospects can this person carry? Oh, they ought to be able to carry 300. No.
They can carry them, they're just not going to take them
They're
anywhere.
not going to do anything with them, right?
That's right.
Well, Eddie, it's been great to have you today. Thanks so much for joining us for the Futures in Fundraising podcast. We certainly wish you and UNCW a bright future as you move forward and continue to grow and manage growth. And thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
And we will see you all next time on the next episode of Futures in Fundraising.